Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Molly sat in front of the big TV and honestly didn't see what was on. All she could think about was one thing. Her husband didn't come home tonight again. She didn't want to think he was cheating on her. It just couldn't be because they had only been married 2 years. With Kevin, they met at a mutual friend's party. Molly wasn't much for noisy company, but it was her best friend's birthday party. Jenna immediately told her, "Molly, don't even think you're going to get away with it this time either. I'm 25 years old. It's my first real anniversary and you just have to be there. Why don't I just come by and say congratulations and that's it?" "Well, you know how it is." "I know. That's why I'm telling you it won't work. You have to be. It's out of the question." Molly sighed and Jenna got all worked up. "So we have to go out and celebrate." Jenna decided to have her birthday party at the cottage. On any other occasion, Molly would have loved to go to Jenna's parents' country house. It was so nice there that she never wanted to leave. But on a holiday, with a bunch of people there, the only hope is that it won't be so crowded. Molly chose light, almost white jeans, a clean white t-shirt that accentuated her tan very well, and tied her black, straight hair into a ponytail. She was ready, inspecting herself in the mirror. She was satisfied with a moderately provocative outfit, and no one would say she was modest, as Jenna usually was. When everything stopped at the gate, Molly honestly wanted to leave right away. There were at least 20 people in the large front yard, but Jenna had already seen her and was rushing to the car. "Well, finally, I thought I'd lost my friend." "Come on, Jenna. You know what? I don't like big company. I don't give Jacob anything to drink. I think if you don't come, to send him for you." Molly laughed. "That's it. Now your fiancé is going to hate me." Nothing of the sort. Jacob appeared next to me, as if from under the earth, and immediately handed Molly a glass. "If I hate you, I'll live. Just until Jenna finds out. You can't hide anything from her. And that, you know, from my favorite girlfriend. She'll burn me to death." Molly took the glass. "Come on, Jacob. You've made Jenna completely bloodthirsty." Jacob hugged Jenna and Molly and took them to where the grill was smoking deliciously. Molly had already had 3 drinks, but she wasn't getting any happier. In the morning, her father's blood pressure rose, and she wanted to stay home altogether. But her father waved his hands at her. "Don't even think about it. Go and rest. At your age, you need to go out. All you have is school and work." Molly knew she looked more like an old grandmother who would rather stay at home than go out. "Daddy, are you sure?" "Well, of course I am. Actually, at my age, it's normal to have blood pressure." Molly had to go. She had already called Daddy twice, and he said he would have to turn off the phone. If Molly doesn't stop calling and start resting. "I see you're not having any fun at all. Maybe let me get you some new glasses." Molly turned around. There was a young man standing in front of her. They usually cast him as the lead in soap operas. "Thank you, I'm fine. If I want a drink, I'll get one myself. But that's not right. If there's someone around who wants to take care of a beautiful lady, the lady shouldn't have to do anything herself. That's corny. There are hardly any ladies like that left these days. Everybody can do it themselves." He sat down beside her, and Molly sighed. The last thing she wanted was to mingle with a handsome man. She had never trusted such men. It seemed to Molly that the prettier a man was, the less brain in his head. In some ways, you are right, of course. Nowadays, the behavior of a silly coquette is not in fashion. But I suppose it is in every man's mind that a woman must not do everything herself. Molly smiled. "Well, I don't know. It seems to me that everything in the world is changing, and men are now much more helpless than women. Not all of them, of course, but very many. You probably meet the wrong men. Although this is a pattern. A strong woman attracts weak men." He grinned, showing a row of snow-white teeth. It was a punch below the belt. Molly loved more than anything else in the world when a man had perfect teeth. There was a comma in her brain about that. "What kind of person would you say you are? The weak or the original?" The young man laughed. "Are you an ulcer? You think I haven't noticed that I don't have much of a choice." Molly smiled. "Strange. You seem to be so, well, not very stupid. I'll get the champagne though. He left, and Molly was left to ponder the fact that appearances can be deceiving. The young man appeared beside her as suddenly as he had the first time. You always have that manner, the way he looked at her in bewilderment. Well, this one sneaks up quietly, like a cat. He laughed. No way. Both the first and second time I stomped diligently. But you are so immersed in your own thoughts that you just do not hear anything. Molly blushed. She didn't want this young man to think she was crazy. And it's a good thing it's dusk already. At least he won't see her blushing. I want to apologize for not introducing myself. My name is Kevin, and I'm related to a friend of Jacob's. Well, to be quite precise, a very distant relative. So I don't know anybody here, and you are my only salvation. Molly laughed. The confession of the young man was so emotional that it was impossible to remain indifferent. And my name is Molly. I'm a friend of the birthday girl. I already figured that out. Did you see how honored they were to meet you? Molly was pleased that Kevin had noticed her at once. She hadn't expected it of herself. Time passed without her noticing. They chatted about everything and nothing. It was as if Molly exhaled and became a normal girl. It turned out that sometimes just talking without trying to find a catch in the other person's words. It's very interesting. Jenna and Jacob found them. No, look at them. I've been knocked off my feet. I thought my girlfriend left without saying goodbye, but she's settled in just fine. Molly laughed. Jenna, you're a pain in the ass to stay home and a pain in the ass to take your time getting home. Molly, what are you talking about? I, of course, am very glad that you at least relaxed a little. Otherwise, you see nothing but your work. Kevin looked at Molly with interest. Where do you work? Molly didn't have time to answer for her, Jen answered. Kevin, you can't imagine how good Molly is. She works in her father's firm, and I think that very soon my dad will give her the directorship. You're so young and you've already accomplished so much. Molly waved her hands. Don't listen to her. Jenna always exaggerates. Yes, I work for my father, but I'm not planning on becoming principal. And it's really late. And I have to go home. Jenna pouted. Molly, there's plenty of room at the cottage. Why go anywhere? And if the cab driver turns out to be a dishonest person? Jenna made big eyes. Kevin immediately stood up. Don't worry, I have to go home too. So I'll drive Molly home. By cab, of course. He immediately answered Molly's dumb question. Kevin got out with her at her house. You wanted to go home. I can't just let you go. Molly, look how beautiful the weather is. Let's go for a walk. Molly looked at her watch doubtfully. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. At least just a little bit. For half an hour, Kevin looked at her with such pleading eyes. That Molly couldn't refuse him. The half-hour walk didn't work out. They approached Molly's house again. When the clock showed 5:30. Molly, let me take you out someplace. No matter where. What do you like? She didn't even think about it. She said yes right away. She liked Kevin more and more. 3 months later, he proposed to her. Molly was confused. We don't know each other that well. Molly, are you suggesting we date for 5 years? No, tell me if I proposed to you. After 6 months, would you say yes? She thought for a while and smiled. You're probably right. Molly's dad threw a real feast. Kevin was working as some kind of manager on a small salary, and William took care of all the wedding expenses. When Kevin tried to say he could get a loan, his father waved his hands at him. Don't even think about it. We're family now, so we're not going to count. After the wedding, you come to work for me. It's not proper for my son-in-law to get cents. Dad bought them an apartment right away as a wedding present, and Molly set about fixing up their family nest. And it was so interesting that she even stopped going to work temporarily. Although her daddy told her right away to take care of the family, that's your direct responsibility. And if you want, you can come back at any time. And then a year later, Daddy got very sick. She and Kevin were forced to move in with him because William was getting worse every day. The doctors were shaking their hands. They just didn't understand what was wrong. 3 months later, Daddy was gone. Molly was with him in his last moments. Daddy woke up, looked at her with clear eyes. Molly, daughter, be careful with your husband. I can't tell you anything specific, but I do know that you need to be careful. That's all. He closed his eyes and Molly sobbed. If it hadn't been for Kevin, then she didn't know what she would have done at all. He was organizing the funeral. He took charge of the firm. In fact, he was everything to her. Molly looked at her watch again. It was 5:30 in the morning. She should probably go to bed. Since Kevin had been running the firm, he had changed a great deal. Gone was the tenderness, and left a dryness that sometimes bordered on rudeness. Molly tried to talk to him several times, but Kevin yelled, "Don't you get it? I have a lot of work to do. Your father left the firm on the verge of bankruptcy." Molly knew that wasn't true. She ran the firm herself, and she knew full well that her father was doing fine. And Kevin was just trying to exaggerate his merits. That would be all right. Molly was well aware that men always like to present themselves. But Kevin's relationship and his absence from home were very disturbing to Molly. Everything is decided. Tomorrow, she would tell him what she had thought for so long today. Kevin didn't come home until after dinner. She saw that he was shaved, not wrinkled, not tired. The woman grinned. It looked like she was growing huge horns now, but that was all right. The main thing is to realize in time that horns don't look good. "Kevin, we need to talk." He made a grimace. "Molly, don't start. I'm tired, and I at least want to rest at home." "Kevin, first of all, I won't take up much of your precious time. Secondly, it's not what you think. I don't care where you've been." Kevin looked at her carefully, then sat back in his chair. "Come on, I'm listening to you." Molly, with her arms crossed over her chest. "I'll let you know that I'm going back to the firm tomorrow. So you'll have time off now. I don't know where you're going back to or why. I'm going back to my firm. I'm the owner, in case you haven't forgotten." "Thank you. You've been very helpful. You can stay at the firm, or you can make up your own. But it's up to you. I don't understand. Do you want to be the head of the firm?" "Why would I want to be head of the firm? In case you haven't forgotten, and your first day on the job, I'll start with an independent audit, of course." She could see perfectly well that Kevin was in complete shock. Molly turned around and left the room. 2 minutes later, the front door slammed. She looked out. Kevin was gone. Molly sighed in relief. She decided to lie down. She had been so used to being silent, submissive, and putting up with everything lately that speaking in front of Kevin had taken a lot out of her. Molly fell fast asleep. Kisses woke her. She twitched and opened her eyes. Sitting next to her was Kevin. "Molly, you were right about everything. I'm completely out of my mind. I just forgot what I have." Kevin began to kiss her again. Molly resisted at first, but then she gave in. After a while, Kevin said, "Molly, let's have a picnic." She turned to him with interest. "What do you mean? You and I, when was the last time we went anywhere?" Molly shrugged. "I don't remember." Kevin leaned on his elbow. "Let's go get something to eat, and then we'll go to the country." "You want me to make you a kebab? A real one? You've never had that before." "Oh, Kevin, the firm will be fine. I know a great place. You're gonna love it. Besides, it's been so long since we've been together. We'll be there. Come on, say yes. It's only for a couple of days." Molly smiled. She hadn't felt this good with her husband in a long time. She wanted to make it last, so she nodded her head. Kevin jumped up. "So we get everything we might need together real quick, and I'll go to the office and back and warn you that I'll be gone for a couple of days. Yes, take some beautiful lingerie against the backdrop of nature. You will be amazing." Molly blushed. Kevin left the room. She reached out once more and began to pack her things. The mood was just fine. Kevin returned literally an hour later. "Wow, that's only for 2 days." Molly guiltily shrugged. "I tried to take only the essentials." Kevin smiled. "So we'll spend 2 days in comfort." They drove for a long time. Molly even fell asleep and somehow quickly lost direction. "Kevin, we're going somewhere very far away, but you're about to see this beauty." And sure enough, after just a few kilometers, they turned into the woods. There were centuries-old spruce trees all around, and a faint path snaked between them. Half an hour more, and Molly's eyes opened up to a glade of extraordinary beauty. Everything was so beautiful it seemed like a fairy tale. It was beautiful. "Well, I told you so." He quickly set up his tent. I don't know why he had it in his car. Then he made a fire. Molly went to the lake. It was quite tiny, but apparently very deep. "Molly, let's go get mushrooms." She laughed. "Are you serious?" "Well, of course, you've seen the forest here. There must be a lot of mushrooms." They walked along the shore and picked some seps. Kevin nodded happily. "We'll roast them with meat tonight for a celebratory dinner." "Kevin, are you sure? What if you can't eat them?" "You can. I've been fond of mushrooms since I was a kid. I know absolutely everything about them." They had a wonderful evening. Molly felt as if she were on her honeymoon again. In the morning, Kevin woke her up. "Coffee's ready, and the beavers are waiting for us." "Kevin, what beavers?" Molly smiled. "The real ones aren't very far away. You just haven't seen such beauty. They have such dams there." "How would you know?" "I do. I know everything." She drank her coffee. It was so unusual, probably because it was made over a campfire. And then they hit the road. Everything was fine at first, but then the trees got kind of humpy. And the ground under their feet was soft. "Kevin, I don't like it here. Let's go back." "You what?" "It's only 500 meters to go." Molly, who had never been able to get her bearings in the forest, sighed resignedly. They walked a little farther, and then she started to see things in a strange double vision. "Kevin, I can't. I'm getting double vision." He leaned toward her because Molly was already sitting up and said, "Double vision, that's good. You're going to have even more fun from here on out." Molly looked at him in surprise. Kevin looked distorted the whole time. "You don't understand. I'll explain it to you, especially since you'll never tell anyone anything anymore. I've spent so much time trying to bring your daddy to his grave. And you tell me you're going to run the firm. In what way? It's my firm. Now, after some bum gets buried in your place, it'll finally be mine by deed. Is that what you needed, to live a little longer? But no, you're in a hurry to the next world. I could just kill you, but it's so boring. I didn't lie to you about the mushrooms. I know them very well, and your daddy died because I gave him the juice of a very good mushroom instead of his medicine, and so will you today. Although no, you won't die. You'll suffer a long time, because instead of one tree you'll have two, and instead of one bear you might have three." "Kevin, no, are you kidding?" He laughed, and his laughter made her uncomfortable. "I'm not joking. This is all your fault. You signed your own sentence. And the woods are so bad that no one will ever find you. Do you understand? Never." Kevin stood up abruptly and went somewhere. Only now Molly began to realize that Kevin wasn't kidding at all. She tried to get to her feet, but they wouldn't listen. Molly collapsed and watched as several of Kevin's figures melted away in the distance. She cried, only surely no one heard her. Charles was walking along the forest path. He heard something in the woods disturbing the birds. Running animals are not capable of making such a stir, so it must have been an outsider. Hunters are unlikely. It's a wilderness and a swamp. Not that hunters, but the animals themselves don't like this area very much. Then who? Someone came, got lost. Charles had no other guesses. He had been living in the woods for a long time. He condemned himself to such an existence. But he also combined his work as a forester with his recluse. He gave up the apartment he had been offered in the village and built himself a real fortress in the forest within a year. He no longer wanted to live with people who turned out to be worse than animals. 5 years ago, his parents had an accident. They drove off into a ditch that looked more like a cliff because of one underdog. Several cars stopped at the top. They even called an ambulance, but no one even tried to help them. Then the doctor told him if a tourniquet had been put on in time, they could have been saved. Charles stayed in town for another 3 months. He would have left sooner, but he needed to sell their business, to rent the apartment, because it took a long time to sell it. And then he just jabbed his finger on the map and went where he got to. The woods were getting thicker. Beside Charles, his faithful friend Max retreated noiselessly. That was the name of his big husky dog. Suddenly the dog became alert. "Max, who is it?" The dog stood for a while, sniffing the air in its nostrils. Then he darted off to the side of the trail. Charles ran after it, pulling the gun from his shoulder. After a minute, he saw the woman. She had absolutely crazy eyes, her face all scrunched up. Her hands were ragged. We sat down and immediately realized she hadn't been here the first day. She noticed him and hid behind a tree. Charles also thought, "Is she crazy? Do not be afraid, I will help." The woman came out of the tree and walked towards him. She walked uncertainly, as if she could not see where she was putting her feet. "Give me a drink." He took out a flask, opened it, handed it to her. "Just don't drink too much." The woman greedily sipped at the water. "Can you walk?" "Yes." Molly woke up in the village hospital. She knew it by the wooden, windowed windows and the wooden painted floor. And a smiling nurse woke up. "That's good. How are you feeling?" "Oh, we all got scared. We've never had patients like that in our lives. And our Mason's been running and running. I'll go get him now." The nurse ran out the door, and Molly tried to remember everything that had happened to her. Nothing. After they'd gone into the woods with Kevin, just nothing. Though no, she remembered the man's eyes, those strange, very bright green eyes. Maybe she'd imagined him. She'd never met a man with eyes like that before. A moment later, the door swung open, and Dr. Molly entered the room, involuntarily smiling in spite of all the tragedy of the situation. He really looked like a village healer or a healer tall, one might say, a giant altogether. A beard almost to the waist and round little glasses. "What have we here?" He looked me in the eyes, wiggled his finger, and smiled in satisfaction. "What is your name?" "Dear lady." Molly was about to say her name, but then she thought of Kevin and said Nancy. "Nancy." The doctor clapped his hands. "That is wonderful. And where do you live?" "In the capital?" "That's very nice. And what were you doing in our forests?" "I got lost. I was picking mushrooms for a bird, and then another one." "Well, let's pretend that I believe you. I won't torment you anymore today. It's evening and we need to rest. We'll do the rest tomorrow." "Doctor, wait. I have to make a phone call." "And this, please." He handed her the phone. Molly smiled. She hadn't seen such a push-button wonder in a long time. "Don't worry. All my calls are free. I have to make a lot of calls for work, but I'll come back in half an hour." Molly held the phone in her hands for a minute. She remembered the number. Finally, she dialed the right numbers. "Jenna, hi, it's me." She and Jenna hadn't talked much lately. Or rather, they talked, but more over the phone. They occasionally met at a cafe. Molly wasn't really in the mood. She didn't like to go out much before. And now she didn't want to at all. Jenna took offense, telling her that Kevin had totally spoiled her, but Molly just guffawed and laughed at Jenna. "Jenna, did you just get married? Should sit next to your husband and be happy." "Oh, don't be ridiculous. I've known Jacob for 1,000 years. Where's he gonna go? Will he go away from me?" There was silence in the phone, and Molly hastily said, only if someone else is around, "Do not call me by my first name, Molly." "Is it really you?" "I am, of course. Why are you so surprised?" "Why am I surprised? It's actually your funeral tomorrow. Did I crash my car or get burned in a fire?" "Molly, it's not funny at all. You were in a car accident 2 days ago. I don't understand anything. Tomorrow then." "Jenna, I really need your help. But as you know, it has to be in a way that no one knows anything." "Really? Anything. The main thing is that you're alive." Molly didn't go into detail. She only explained in general terms what had happened. But that was enough. She cried. "Molly, how could it be?" "How? Jenna, let's talk about it later. We have to do everything now." "Yeah, sure, go ahead." Molly explained her plan. Jenna fervently assured her that she would do exactly that. Except Molly didn't know the main thing, where she was. She had to get out of bed. Staggering, she reached the door, looked out, and immediately that nurse came up to her. "Is it too early to get up? Can you tell me, please, the address where the hospital is?" "It is in the village of Brusdovka." "And the district?" The nurse gave a wave of her hands. My God, the poor girl. She named not only the district, but the region as well. Molly felt sick. What if they don't make it? But apparently Jenna was already surfing the internet in parallel with the conversation. "Molly, don't worry. It is about 350 kilometers away. We can make it. Get some rest." Molly handed the phone to the doctor, who appeared in her room about 10 minutes later. "Everything is fine." "Yes, thank you, doctor." The relatives were very worried. "All's well that ends well." He chuckled and left the room. As a final word to her, he told you to get as much sleep as possible. The first time you may have nightmares is a consequence of the poisoning. Don't you remember? I think you ate raw mushrooms. Molly did doze off. She was awakened by a noise in the hallway. Did you see the time? What the hell is the time? We're here to pick up a relative. What relative you found in the woods? Well, you should have just said so. The voices were getting closer. Molly sat up on the bed. She smiled involuntarily. No inhibitions ever existed for Jenna. The ward door swung open and a nurse appeared on the threshold. You've got some loud visitors here, stirring up all the patients. Jenna rushed right over to her. Geez, how tortured are you? Jacob followed. He was carrying a large bag. Hello, Molly. Teach me how to have so much fun. Jenna threw him a look that made him immediately become serious. I'll be quiet now. The babysitter left. Jenna said, let's get changed and let's go. I will tell you all about it on the way. Molly said goodbye to the nurse and looked in on the doctor. He didn't recognize her at first, and then yelled in his usual manner. I thought so. I thought you wouldn't stay with us long. Molly smiled. Thank you very much. What do I have to thank you for? Thank you. You should tell that strange young man who brought you here. Who was he? Molly was well aware that she hadn't come here herself, that those green eyes weren't her dream either. The doctor held up his hands. I have no idea. He hadn't introduced himself. I didn't have time to ask. Molly wanted to ask something else, but Jenna tugged at her sleeve. We have a hell of a long drive ahead of us. Molly sighed and followed her friend. There was so much to see and do, she had other things to think about. Molly slept most of the way. She woke up just as they were entering the city. Jenna, what day is the 9th already? The 9th. Molly looked at the city and thought that she hadn't been here in 5 days. It felt like an eternity. Kevin hung up. So, is it time to go? Maybe you should stay home. Well, no. I've waited long enough, and I want to make sure everything went right. Betty, but you know there's going to be a lot of people there. I'm going to find out sooner or later anyway. And you know that. So come on, keep up the good work. All right, get ready. We have to be there in an hour. He'd been having an affair with Betty for about a year. Molly was all consumed with grief, paying no attention to anything, and he got bored. He disliked his wife from the beginning, but he did not cheat on her. He was quite happy with her beautiful body. Molly always took care of herself. Kevin, on the other hand, was of the opinion that if everything was there was no need to waste time looking for something else. And then Betty came to work for them. She was a real witch. Kevin tried to resist for a while, but quickly fell down. He fell in love to the point where he was just blown away. Kevin was even ready to give up his plan, his dream of becoming very rich, and suggested that Betty leave his wife right away. She then laughed back. Are you a fool or are you pretending? How can you voluntarily leave a golden hen? Or do you think I'm going to live somewhere in a Khrushchevka and be happy? No, my dear. And Kevin agreed. He agreed with Betty on everything. For him, in principle, nothing had changed. There was just a little more spending. Betty required expenditures, but he hardly had to spend on his wife and home. The firm was very good at bringing in everything because his father-in-law was Evisk. It was a pity he had to be taken out so early. It seemed that he started digging under him. He didn't want to risk it. It took him too long to get there. Betty. But there will be a lot of acquaintances there, and surely someone will figure it out, and that everyone will find out sooner or later anyway. What difference did it make when there was common sense in what she said? Kevin, of course, could have said that it must take some time for no one to think anything wrong, but he knew full well that Betty would change his mind. They arrived about 15 minutes before the ceremony started. Kevin turned to Betty and firmly said, "Get out of the car. In 5 minutes, come to me until it's over. Don't come any closer. I don't want anyone else to think about it, especially since Molly's girlfriend will be there. She's not stupid at all." Betty pouted her lips. "You don't have to say anything. She's not stupid herself." Kevin kissed her and went outside. He almost forgot to put on a sorrowful face, and with that expression, holding a bouquet of scarlet roses, he went inside. There were a lot of people. Some came up to him, offered condolences. Some just clapped him on the shoulder. He saw Jenna, strangely enough, but she was without her husband. And that's a good thing. Jacob didn't want to see her. Kevin remembered perfectly well how he had come up to him at their wedding and said Molly was a friend of Jenna's and mine too. If you try to hurt her, you're on your own. Kevin looked at Jacob, surprised and even a little afraid. He laughed. Relax. You're not going to hurt Molly, are you? No, of course not. Why would I hurt her? I love her. Then they broke up, but the conversation was imprinted on Kevin's mind. The usher came up to him. You have something to say, and then we'll say goodbye. Kevin nodded, moving toward the beautiful coffin. It's very hard for me to say. Everyone knows that Molly and I are very recently married. I'm not afraid to say it's been a real honeymoon for us these past 2 years. He met Betty's eyes for a second. She was smiling frankly, and Kevin was suddenly uncomfortable. She didn't seem as smart as he thought she was. He looked away quickly. I don't have the words to express how I feel right now. Molly, this is a very bright person, very kind, sympathetic. I've always admired her. Now I can't even say goodbye properly. Kevin paused, waved a handkerchief dry eyes, and suddenly he heard someone applauding him. He looked up into the hall in surprise and turned pale. The people who had been at the farewell were numb at all. Molly was walking toward him, accompanied by Jacob and several policemen. She smiled and said, Kevin, if I was that good, why did you drive me into the woods and leave me? And Kevin was backing away. He frantically remembered which way the door was. Betty, when she saw Molly, knew at once that there was nothing more to catch her here. Besides, the sooner she got away, the better for her. She slipped the flowers to whoever was standing nearby and turned to run. But that didn't work out for her. Standing right in front of her was Jenna. How on earth did I want to do that? Betty was confused, which is what? And Jenna drove her fist into Betty's nose. She immediately collapsed, screaming, Bitch, you broke my nose. Jenna rubbed her arm. She played tennis and she was a little girl for a reason. It seemed like a harmless sport, but it trained her hands. At the coffin, other action was unfolding. Kevin retreated until he hit the wall. He realized there was no point in running. There was only one thing left to do. He rushed forward and grabbed Molly. He turned her around quickly and put a knife to her neck. If anyone moves, I'll kill her. It didn't work out that way. Here everyone froze, including the cops. At that moment, Betty screamed again in complete silence. How am I supposed to get away with a nose like that? Kevin was distracted for only a second, but it was enough for Molly to kick his heel into his foot. Molly had an oddity. She was very fond of stilettos, long, thin, like stilettos. Her husband, on the other hand, preferred soft shoes, loafers, shoes with a hole in them. The girl could physically feel the heel cracking into her foot itself. Kevin howled so that those standing nearby just stalled, and Molly pushed him off. A second, and the handcuffs clicked on his hands. It wasn't until Kevin and Betty took her away that the little shivers started to hit. Jenna, please go home. Now, honey, just a second. Jenna threw herself at the receptionist, standing there in genuine terror. You're going to bury her after all. Who's there? Put it up without the inscription for now. Maybe we'll find out who's there. And of course, there's no need to bury her next to her father. At home, Molly felt even worse. She walked through the rooms, stopped at her father's portrait, and began to fall slowly. Jacob jumped up to her just in time. She woke up in the clinic. Jenna was sitting next to her, and the doctor was there. Have you lost your mind? There's so much in your system, plus the exhaustion, the nervous breakdown. How did you even walk? Molly smiled. Doctor, I've finished all my business, so I'll be treated as long as I have to, at least for the rest of my life. It's all a joke to you, Molly, but it's very serious. If only we could figure out what substances are in your system. Doctor, I'll give you a hint. It's mushrooms. You ate raw mushrooms. It still can't be. It's not like you ate a fly swatter. The thing is, I didn't eat any. But my husband happens to be an expert on poisonous mushrooms. If I understand correctly, did he slip or put something in my coffee? Stop. The doctor sat down on the bed with her. Did the taste of the coffee remind you of grass or hay? Molly nodded. I also thought it was because we were in nature. He jumped up. I'll send the nurse over now and she'll take your tests again. There's something I need to clarify, but I think I've got it all figured out. He ran off and Jenna looked at her with huge eyes. Is that true? Yeah. Also, Jenna, Kevin told me that he poisoned my father too. You know, he was sure I wouldn't get out. He told me everything. Tears ran down Jenna's cheeks. I'm so sorry, Molly. Molly looked at her in surprise. I don't know why, but it was at my birthday party. You met him? Jenna, what are you talking about? It's not your fault, it's my fault. A nurse came into the room. She quickly took some blood from Molly and came out. Jenna just wanted to say something. Jacob came into the room. What's with all the secrecy? I learned a lot of interesting things from the police. You have no idea. He grabbed a juice box from the table and started drinking right out of the box. His throat was dry. He sat down and the girls stared at him. Do you know where Kevin is from? He looked at Molly. She shrugged. I think he's from some village or something, I don't know exactly. He really didn't like to talk about it. Besides, he said he'd been away a long time. That's right. He left as soon as he came of age. His parents passed away on the same day. They were drinkers. No one ever thought they were poisoned by anything other than booze. Wait, are you saying that he did them too? And with the help of mushrooms? How did you know that? Kevin's a coward. Right now, he's sitting there at the station in his wet pants, dropping confessions. But he says he's talented. He can't go to jail because he's the only one who knows the formula. I thought he was trying to play dumb. Maybe he really is crazy with fear. God, yes, he's a real monster. Molly sighed. Jacob perked up. You still don't know where he came from or where his wife slapped him on the arm. Tell me already. Otherwise, I'll give you a hard time. Jacob paused anyway, and then said, and Kevin comes from Prusdovka. Molly gasped. So that's how he knows these places so well. They sat for a while longer, and Jacob said, so Jenna, let's go home. Molly needs to rest and heal. They got up. Molly didn't hold them back because her eyes were really closing. Molly had to stay in the hospital for over 2 weeks. She did not feel normal until the end of the second week. Almost every day the police came to her and asked her a lot of questions. She was so tired of it all. Then there was the trial. Molly heard so much about her husband that she had to take valerian again. By the way, Betty, who was being held as a witness, was also in a mild state of prostration. When it was all over, Molly finally breathed a sigh of relief, and only then could she live at home normally. Without flinching, without being frightened by every rustle. She took great pleasure in gathering up all Kevin's things and taking them to the trash. There were a bunch of bums standing there herself, and Molly called out to one of them with her hand. Here, take some very nice things here. Some of them are very expensive. The homeless man looked at her in surprise, looked in the bag, then grabbed the bag and ran. The others read that he was carrying some kind of booty and quickly rushed after him with threats. Molly didn't even have time to tell them she had 3 more bags of stuff. Kevin was quite the fashionista. Molly set to work. She was horrified when she realized how much money was being siphoned off from the firm. So she plunged herself into the job. It wasn't until 6 months later that things started to get more or less done. By the way, what happened to her helped her a lot. The process was loud. Everyone who encountered her immediately expressed admiration for her courage. Deals were closing faster, profits were gradually increasing. Molly sold the house she lived in with her father and then Kevin. I decided that I had to start my life with a clean slate. When things were more or less going well, Molly decided to distract herself. The first thing she really wanted to do was to find and thank the man who had saved her. She wasn't sure if she could, because the police couldn't find him. But if she couldn't find him, she would at least do something for the hospital where she had been brought to her senses. Jenna said I would go with you. And don't tell me anything. I don't want you to disappear again. Jenna, of course I don't mind. But where would I disappear to? I'll just drive over to that hospital. Maybe spend a couple of nights, help out a little bit more, and get some rest. Well, I don't know. Maybe I will. But Jacob won't be happy. He won't let me go anywhere now. Molly looked at her friend. Jenna, are you okay? Yeah, we are so happy. You have no idea. Molly hugged her. I'm very happy for you guys, too, very happy. There can be no talking. You're not going anywhere. Molly drove up to the village and stopped. It was nothing special. An ordinary village, just big enough. It stood on a hillside, so the full picture of the village, surrounded by woods, looked kind of lost in front of her. Molly smiled slightly. There was no fear now. At the very beginning of the village, she met an old woman and stopped. Excuse me, please, where can I rent a room or a cabin? The old woman stared at her with attentive eyes. Molly still felt like an X-ray. What need do you have to rent a cabin from us? This isn't the city. You're here for the holidays, so this is not the right place. There's nothing but mosquitoes here. Molly was a little taken aback by this ardent monologue, but quickly pulled herself together. Yes, I only need to work for a few days. The old woman immediately mollified. I need it for work. Well, if you're not noisy, then I can rent you a room. I have a large annex, a separate entrance for children made only children do not come. Oh, that would be nice. How much would what cost? Well, what's the room rate? I pay right away. The old woman suddenly laughed. Oh, I can't. It's you city people who measure everything by money. But here it's different when you have tea with the old lady. That's good. Do you think we're old? Who needs us? Besides, when Lisa finds out I have a lodger in town, she'll be jealous. Molly could hardly suppress a chuckle. Apparently Lisa is this grandmother's sworn enemy. Maybe when she was young, they had a disagreement about her grandfather. She opened the passenger door. Will you get in? Show me where to go. The old lady quickly climbed into the car, looked around, oddly enough, from the outside. The car was red, but everything inside was white. What, didn't they have enough red paint? Molly laughed. Granny, it's white leather, real leather, even stranger than leather jackets I've seen. But cars never. She finally stopped staring and turned to Molly. My name is Wendy, and my name is Molly. It's a common name in your village, Mason. I know that's the doctor's name at the hospital, isn't it? Yes, my son is named after my grandfather. Molly looked at her grandmother in surprise. And I thought your children live far away. They don't come, and they live far away too. And Mason is the oldest one. He's already a grandfather in the village. He has his own house. Why should he come to my house? My two daughters in the district center are very close, but they have families and jobs. They come often, but they don't stay overnight. And two sons. In their old age with their grandfather, and even two at once they went to the big city long ago. Good, once a year they'll get away. Now money rules the world, not people. Molly looked at Wendy in admiration. You have 5 of them. 5, you are just a heroine. The old woman laughed. Well, what a heroine you are. It's just that my grandfather and I had a strong love. May he rest in peace. It's now I want to get pregnant. I don't. Then I don't. You didn't have any of this newfangled stuff before. I don't want. Here you have it, and give birth. Molly smiled at the bad impression she had at first, and the old woman left no trace of it. Where to go then? The old woman looked at Molly thoughtfully. It's not far, and you can go through that street. I'll show you the way. Of course I can. What for? Molly didn't really understand the old lady because she waved at the house one way, and the street they had to drive down was on the other side. So Lisa lives there, obviously on the bench idling. Molly's mood finally lifted. Of course we would. They were making a real lap of honor around the village when a smart little house appeared ahead, and the bench in front of it, Wendy visibly perked up. See the victim sitting there, looking for someone to gossip to. Molly drove slowly, and Wendy nodded amiably to the grandmother who sat on the bench and waved. Molly spent even more time in the village than she had planned, and there were such helpful, good people here. She bought an ultrasound machine for the hospital, which almost made Mason crazy. You don't understand, you just don't understand what it means to us. I went to college in the capital. I wanted to become a medical luminary. But then I realized, if everyone becomes a luminary, who will treat people like my mother and her friend Aunt Lisa? There is, of course, one healer here, but although I admit that he can do the impossible, it's all unscientific. One side of it I admit. The other side I don't believe. and I think it's all an accident." Molly understood the solemnity of the moment, but couldn't help herself. She asked, "As a friend?" I thought they were enemies. She'd heard about some sort of healer too, but decided to take it in order because the information was already difficult to assimilate. Who? Aunt Lisa and her mother. Really? They've been friends since the first grade. And their friendship is really strange. They are always competing. If Aunt Lisa has nephews, some new flowers. Mom at 6 a.m. near my gate, I have to drop everything and immediately take her to the market for these seedlings, which no one else has. And vice versa, if something new has appeared at my mother, Aunt Lisa immediately begins to bother her son. He lives in her town and leaves everything and rushes over. One day, Aunt Lisa got very sick. I had to put her in the hospital. My mother sat by her bedside day and night. Yes, she was so upset that she came down with pressure herself. So I had them in the same room at the hospital. And while they were lying there, everyone was arguing. They laughed and Molly finally asked about the healer. "What do you mean he does miracles you don't believe in?" Mason gained air and Molly realized that the story would be interesting and emotional. We've got a little guy who lives in the backwoods. I honestly don't even know how old he is, but he's pretty tough. So he's kind of a healer. You know, the kind of folk healers. When I became chief doctor of the hospital, very unhappy, was all with their ailments, went to him once, and I went, began to swear that the unsanitary, without any education, cripples people. He looked at me so attentively and said it was good that you were back. Will you be a good doctor? Yes, and I would feel better. And don't swear at me. I can help a man when medicine is powerless, and I don't charge for it. So you can't accuse me of greed either. And he's gone. Didn't say another word. Just turned around at the door and said, "If you need help, come see me." I was so taken aback. I thought it was just a bit cheeky. But the old man had already disappeared behind the door of his house. And then, a year later, we had a boy fall out of a tree, and he didn't seem to hurt anything. Very badly, a couple of fractures in his leg and arm, and he couldn't get up. The mother was all black. The father doesn't look like himself either. They asked me to help. What am I? He was in the regional hospital, then in the district one. Then he was brought home. I did all sorts of massages using Chinese methods. But nothing. And then, seeing the despair of his parents, and we live next door, we communicate well. So I decided to go see this healer. Seriously. Molly was out of breath. She imagined what it must have been like for Mason. Yes, Molly. I was embarrassed, and I didn't believe it, but I wanted to seize every opportunity. The kid's only 11, and he's already got a blank stare. So I go over there, and the old man was standing there saying, "I've been waiting for you. Why didn't you come earlier?" So we went inside, and I got a little bit dazed. The old man was no ordinary man. He had a lot of different herbs, and on the shelves were ancient books in the old language, next to modern encyclopedias of medicine. We talked to him. He asked me about all the symptoms, analysis, and then he said, "Bring the boy to me for a month, and he will live here. If I can, I will put him on his feet, and if not, no one will." I was shocked by his statement. I don't think there's an ounce of modesty, just bluster. Mason stopped talking. Molly couldn't take it anymore. So what? So the guy runs and plays soccer. He just doesn't crawl through trees anymore. That was a good lesson. Molly gasped. Sure, she'd heard of it or read about it, but she'd always thought it was just fiction. Now she felt as if she were listening to a fairy tale, and an insanely interesting one at that. Why haven't you spoken to him yet? Is he still alive? No, I haven't. But always, when I go mushrooming, I leave him a little present on his doorstep, some trinket from the store. Well, he doesn't go to the store. I think he even bakes his own bread. Molly didn't want to leave, especially since she never learned anything about the man who had saved her. Mason told her that he had brought her back late in the evening. The doctor was going home. Molly brought her in his arms, put her on the couch, and said he had found her in the woods. And that was it. You wouldn't believe the only thing I can say about him. He's about 35 years old, give or take, and he has a big dog. We don't have those here. Husky or something. While I was fussing with you guys, he disappeared. I never knew who he was. Maybe a hunter, maybe a mushroom hunter, or maybe some kind of ghost? I mean, he was walking through the village. Nobody saw him. That's strange. And the police couldn't find out anything. Molly, what really happened? She told Mason everything from beginning to end. He stared thoughtfully to himself. Then he said, I remember this Kevin, and I remember his parents. They were harmless people, though they drank. They loved their son. I had my suspicions, though, that it wasn't the drinking. I insisted then that they were taken to the district center for examination. Nowadays they take everyone. And then there was a conclusion, and everything could be buried. All the more reason they all came up with at once. Kevin wasn't liked here. He never had any friends among his peers. Always alone, always wandering around, taking notes. Even some people thought he was a little crazy. So that's how it turned out. Their house is still standing. You could go see. Molly shook her head, not wanting to. When she left, Wendy Mason and the other neighbors literally stuffed her car with gifts and jams and pickles. And Uncle Michael, who was Wendy's neighbor and part-time caretaker at the hospital, brought a huge pork ham. Smoked. Molly clutched at her heart. What am I going to do with so much? I'll never eat it. Uncle Michael calmly put the sealed ham in the trunk and said, so you do not eat alone. You have friends, so invite them to your place. Besides, I see Wendy has already given you her liquor, and her liquor makes my ham very tasty. Molly was on her way out of the village when she saw an overgrown house. She stopped. She was sure it was the house Mason was talking about. She felt so disgusted, so bitter, that she quickly put the paddle to the floor, and the car raced toward the highway. That evening, she invited both Jenna and Jacob to her new home. When they arrived and saw a ham in the middle of the table, Jacob stretched out, seeing the trip was fruitful. All evening, she told me what wonderful people lived in Ruzdovta. Jenna reached out thoughtfully. That's strange. I thought it was a swamp, and the people were like that. Then why did this one turn out to be such a ghoul? Jacob put his hand on her arm. Let's not talk about sad things. It's time to go back to normal life. Molly cheerfully picked up on that. Yes, we are. There's only light ahead. Molly smiled. So tell me, how are things going with my future godson? I'm going to be the godmother. Well, of course, Molly, who else but you? They sat up late into the night. As much as Molly tried to persuade them, they never spent the night. Jacob, at least don't drive, Molly. Come on. I only had one drink. But Jenna hugged her husband. Molly, really don't worry. Jacob is a very careful driver. And the more so, he did drink one drop. I feel safer with him. Molly only shook her head. Well, you can't drive, even after a drop. But Molly has 10 minutes to drive here. The city is completely empty at night. Calm down. I'll call from home. They left, and Molly began to clear the table. While she's cleaning up, the boys will just make it home, and then you can go to bed with peace of mind. She had already cleaned up, washed everything. The phone was silent. Went to the shower, put the phone next to her. Nothing, silence. I looked at the time. 45 minutes had passed. Molly grabbed the phone. In that time, she could have walked home 3 times. She dialed Jenna. The caller ID was turned off. No surprise there. Jenna always forgets to charge her phone. She immediately dialed Jacob. No one answered the phone for a long time. Then an unfamiliar male voice answered, listening. Molly was confused. Who are you? Where was Jacob? How can I speak to you? Molly's stomach suddenly twisted, her palms sweating. Molly, who are you? I'm a traffic inspector. What's your relationship to Jacob? And the girl who was with him, they are my friends. They just left me. I see. I have to inform you that there was an accident at the intersection. The driver of Jacob was killed at the scene. The girl was taken to the hospital in serious condition. The tube fell out of Molly's hands. She looked in front of her and didn't understand what she had been told at all. Then she jumped up. We need to go to Jenna. Maybe she needs something. Molly stopped abruptly. God, as long as she needed anything. Anything at all. Save her. 10 minutes later, she was getting into a cab. Please hurry, I need to get to the hospital. The driver looked at her carefully. There's a wreck around the corner. Molly nodded. Then, in a weak voice, she asked, "What is it?" The driver's side there was a mess. Some young guys were going straight for 200 kilometers, or close to it. The second car stopped to let them through. They skidded, and they smacked that car in the face with all their might. It's bad out there. The young people are -2. The others are in the hospital. And there were victims in that car, too. Molly cried softly. Well, you can't help it if you cry. Pray for the survivor. Let me take you down another street, so you don't have to look at it all. She ran down the hospital corridor. The guard tried to keep her out, but where was there? Molly just got him out of the way. He was somewhere far behind her. Suddenly, someone intercepted her. Where did you see the time? Jenna. My Jenna's here. She was brought in from the accident. The doctor looked at her differently. Yeah, they brought a girl in for surgery now. Who are you? I'm a friend, my best friend. Come on, I'll walk you out. Does she have any family? Yeah, she has parents. And Jacob does. Here, sit here. I have to call my parents. Tell them to come over. How will the operation end? No one knows. It's complicated. He sat her down in a chair and walked down the hall. Molly stared at the operating room sign. At the top was a sign that said, "Do not enter." Surgery in progress. She pulled out her phone. She should have called Jenna's parents. Jenna was the only one they had, and they were just dusting her off. And how to let them know that? Hello, a sleepy voice. Is Jenna's mom alarmed? Molly asked. What's wrong? Evelyn. Jenna and Jacob were in an accident. Something rustled and Jenna's father, Molly, picked up the phone. Molly, what happened, David? Jenna's in surgery right now. The situation is very serious. The doctor asked that you come in. Molly, she's going to live. David almost screamed. I don't know, Jacob, he's dead. There was a momentary pause on the phone. Then David said, in a kind of depressed voice, What hospital are we going to be in? Molly hung up, picked up the phone again. Maybe Jacob's parents had already been told, but she needed to call. She couldn't remember it herself. As she told Jacob's father, he was the one who picked up the phone. She heard Jacob's mother shouting somewhere behind her. And Dad asked about Jenna. She's in surgery. Molly. Is it his fault? No, some youth. He was quiet for a long time. Then Molly heard Jacob's mother calling his name. The phone went off. She dropped her head in her hands. God, that's enough. No more needed. Footsteps were heard in the hallway, and she looked up. Jenna's parents were walking toward her. Her mother was holding her father's hand, though he could hardly move his legs. They had been sitting there for 3 hours. Mom just stared at one point, and David stroked her hand. The door opened so suddenly that everyone jerked. Molly and the parents jumped up to meet the doctor. He stood up and looked at them. We did everything we could. The injuries are very severe. Now all we can do is wait. Yes, as you understand, there is no more pregnancy either. Evelyn howled softly. David yanked her back. Stop it. Jenna is alive. She's going to make it. She's strong. You know she is. The woman stopped talking and seemed to straighten up. You're right, David. Our girl is strong. Jenna did not regain consciousness until the day of Jacob's funeral. She looked around the room with cloudy eyes and saw Molly and Jacob's mother. They rushed to her. Where is my husband? The women looked at each other. Jenna understood. She closed her eyes and tears ran down her cheeks. For about another week, Jenna was between life and death. She might wake up for a while, just staring at herself, then fall back into oblivion. Molly was only at work for 2 hours. At least she had a good team. If any questions arose, they didn't even call, just sent a text message. Then things got better. Jenna was able to talk quietly. She kept asking how Jacob was buried. Why weren't his parents coming? Jenna's dad had a heart attack at the funeral. He's in the hospital now. Jacob's mother is with him. They're very worried about you, and they also feel guilty. Nonsense. Jacob, nothing to do with it. And 2 more weeks later, the doctor called them in. Jenna could already stay awake for hours. True, she wasn't allowed to move yet. She was almost all in a cast. Evelyn was frightened for some reason. Doctor, my heart is racing. You didn't just call us." He nodded. Then he invited them to sit down. "I don't have good news." Molly's chest went cold. What else could it be? Hadn't all the misfortunes yet awakened on her head? Turns out they haven't. Jenna had major injuries in her lower spine. We all very carefully put together a chance, and there was hope. Now I have to say that the sensation in her legs is not coming back. Wait, are you saying that Jenna won't be able to walk? Molly looked at the talking Evelyn. She knew exactly what the woman was thinking. Jenna is a terrible fidget. And if putting Jenna in a wheelchair certainly can't do it, she can't, and that's it. Yeah, I don't know, maybe a miracle will happen someday, but I'm a doctor, and I don't believe in miracles. You have to prepare Jenna somehow. In 3 days I have to tell her about it. Evelyn jumped up. No, you can't. Don't you understand that this is the end for Jenna? She won't be able to. The doctor looked at the woman in silence. What could he do? There are thousands of such cases in practice. Physically, there's nothing wrong. But her legs wouldn't go, and that was it. Jenna faded away. Molly saw that her friend just didn't want to live. She didn't want anything. The only thing she asked for was to take her to Jacob's grave. There she asked everyone to leave and sat in her stroller alone for almost an hour. Molly and her parents stood nearby, ready to help. But after an hour, Jenna called them herself. I want to go home. After that, she barely spoke. Even Molly didn't answer. She refused to sit in the stroller, just lay there, turning her back against the wall. 6 months passed like that. Molly took the cake she had ordered and got into the car. She didn't know how Jenna would feel about the fact that she and her parents had decided to have a family party. It was already her birthday. It turned out even worse than Molly could have imagined. Jenna threw a real tantrum. She cried out that this was the first year of her torment. How much more to come? Screaming that she didn't want to live like this, that she couldn't see their happy faces. She was so broken up that they had to call an ambulance. When Jenna fell asleep, they all sat down in the kitchen. Molly said, I want to tell you something. I don't know how you would feel about it, but I would try it. Jenna's parents looked at her with something hopeful. Molly, go ahead. We're all set. When Molly finished her story, Evelyn said, what if he doesn't take it or he refuses, or he's dead? I will go there tomorrow and find out, and then we will decide. Molly, I don't know how to thank you, but you're welcome for now. I don't have much faith in healers like that myself. Molly had to go to the old man herself. When she arrived, Mason wasn't there. He was away on a promotion. Wendy explained the way as best she could. Just take your time. There's a good path there, but there are others departing from it. You should always pick the one in the middle. Thank you. I'll take my phone with me. If I get lost, I'll climb a tree and call. The old lady laughed, oh, joker. Then she got serious. Go do all the things in the morning. It is necessary to decide, and Molly went. She didn't even want to admit to herself that she was terrified of the forest. Ever since Kevin had left her. At first, as long as the woods weren't too thick, it was fine. She was walking along the path and even humming something. Then it got much worse. The trees above closed in on her as if hiding her from the sky. A panicked thought rushed into my head. They wouldn't find me from the helicopter. Molly paced slower and slower, heart pounding. Her mouth was dry. At last, she stopped. Molly tried to see some light ahead, something to make her feel less afraid. But nothing. Just darkness. The crowns of the trees completely blocked out the sun. Are you lost? She flinched and turned around. A man was looking at her. His eyes were bright green. Now Molly's heart was beating a lot harder. She immediately recognized those eyes for you. The man looked at her carefully, then grinned from the morning. I was still at that moment. A large dog jumped onto the path. It wagged its tail in a friendly way and approached Molly. The woman squatted down. What a clever boy. He's a beauty. The man said grudgingly to Max, behave yourself. Then he turned to Molly again. You still haven't answered. Are you lost? I am not. Are you or aren't you? I'm going to Grandpa Knows. But I'm very afraid of the woods. It's so dark. Strange, why go if you're afraid of the forest? And then, how can you be afraid of the forest? You have to be afraid of people. That's for sure. Molly seemed to say it quietly, but the man heard her follow me. I am also going to Grandpa No's. It was only now that Molly noticed the man had a large, heavy rucksack on his shoulders. The man was already walking about 15 meters away from her, and Molly jogged to catch up with him. Too much stress she'd been through today, whether he recognized her or not. And if he did, why hadn't he said anything? Then again, she hadn't said anything either. What was to be done? Molly was at a complete loss. Even the gloomy mood she'd had since the moment Jenna and Jacob had crashed was gone. My name is Molly. The man glanced at her, Charles. She almost ran after him. How could she walk so fast with that backpack on her shoulders? Why are you going to Grandpa No's house? I'm bringing it from the store. He has become very old. He used to have people who were grateful to him. He hardly takes any now. Molly stopped like a stone. He paused. He looked at her in surprise. You seem to be in good health. Why are you so upset? Molly caught up with him again. You see, I have a friend, almost a sister. She and her husband were in a car accident. Her husband died, and she lost her baby and she can't walk. Grandfather Noah and our last hope. I've heard a lot about him. An accident, you say. Whose fault was that? Oh, there were some young people riding around. They were going too fast, and then they skidded into Jacob and Jenna's car. You see, when they were driving away from me, Jacob had been drinking a little bit. I thought it was his fault, you know. It turned out that he had missed them, like he was supposed to. But still, if they'd taken a cab, things would have worked out differently, Charles said sadly. If we all had known, we would have made the straw. We came, Molly, and didn't notice that the trees had long since parted, and now they were walking between the sparse birch trees. She was looking at the house. Molly had expected to see a flimsy black house, the kind they draw in fairy tale illustrations, but there was a sturdy house in front of her. There were flowers blooming in front of it. Behind the house there was a vegetable garden, and not far from it the goats grazed and the chickens walked. Wow, what were you expecting? A hut on chicken legs. She smiled. Yes, almost so. They approached the house, and the door opened immediately. Charles, you're not alone. Yes, grandfather. A visitor to see you. A visitor, you say? I think it's more than that. Well, never mind. Come in, a visitor. Why so frightened? You shouldn't be afraid of the forest. It didn't scare you. It's not the forest's fault that it's being used, is it? Molly knew at once what Grandpa Noah was talking about. She felt uncomfortable. How he could just read her mind and tell her what was on her mind. Charles unloaded his backpack, said goodbye to Grandfather, and walked out. Grandfather Noah grinned. Don't be pining for more. Tell me, what is the stone on your soul? She sighed and began to speak. She spoke at length. She focused more on the fact that Jenna didn't want anything. That's too bad. What papers did you bring? Yeah, of course I did. Barely got it out of the doctor. The old man spent another hour looking at Jenna's medical history. What can I tell you? I thought I was done, but I can't say no. Let her be my last patient. You can't visit her in a week. She'll stay with me for a month. She won't want to stay. Don't listen, she won't get far. But she won't. But you need to put your female brains in their place, not your legs. Too much running around her grief is understandable. You're only making it worse. Molly came out of her grandfather's house elated and saw Charles right away. She was so happy she couldn't even contain her smile. I thought you had left. Well, how am I going to leave? Are you going to get tetanus in the woods again? We'll have to get you to the hospital again. Molly stopped smiling. Did you recognize me? How could I not recognize you? You wouldn't forget someone like that. Molly didn't understand which one, but I missed that I was looking for you, and the police were looking for you. Well, the police, I see. What were you looking for? I wanted to thank you, but for some reason I'd forgotten everything. You see, everything. Your eyes were the only thing I could remember. He smirked. Maybe it's a good thing you forgot. You were acting a little strange. It wasn't me. Molly smiled. It's some kind of mushroom juice my husband gave me. Charles turned back to her. So your husband took you to the woods on purpose? I'm sorry. A real fairy tale. Slowly they reached the edge of the forest in front of the village. Let's go to Grandma Wendy's for tea. She didn't want to let him go. No, I don't go out to people. Why not? Molly looked at him with huge eyes. For the first time in his life, he wanted to answer. They are not nice. Molly said heatedly, You're wrong. People are different, and you can't judge others by a handful of creeps. I should have hated all men too, but I know they're not all creeps. Maybe you're right. Thanks for the invitation. I have to go. He stepped into the woods, but Molly almost shouted, Wait, how can I find you? You don't disappear again. He stopped for a while, standing with his back to her. Then he asked when you were bringing your friend. A week from Thursday. I'll find you myself. A second, and then it was as if no one was there. Molly stomped her foot in annoyance, and Charles, who had stopped behind the bushes, smiled at the gesture. So he reached his house with a smile. A week later, Molly drove into Hrusdofta. Jenna's father was sitting next to her, and Jenna herself was in the back seat. She was completely unconcerned about the ride, realizing it was useless to argue. And she was silent again. When Molly stopped in front of the woods, she realized that she just wouldn't make it in her car. She got out and looked at the narrow pathway in confusion. And the width of it was unlikely to fit. Damn, how she hadn't thought of that. Good afternoon. Are you in some kind of trouble again? Molly turned sharply, and then, as she had said it the first time, her lips parted in a smile. She couldn't help it. It's me. Is that what you were going to ride in on? I didn't think at all. A young man got out of the car. Why don't you and I get our daughter out of here somehow? How about a stretcher? I'll pay for it. Charles gave him a strange look. You mean if you don't pay, I'll turn around and leave. The man was embarrassed. I'm sorry if I've offended you. That's all right. He looked at the car, stood there, thought. I don't have any options here. Tell you what, while you get settled in here on the grass, get some rest, and I'll be right back. Charles opened the back door. Come on, beautiful, let's go outside. Jenna looked at him in surprise. Don't touch me, I don't want to. I want to go home. We can't all do what we want. Charles picked Jenna up like a feather and set her down on the bedspread that Molly had spread out. Max immediately poked his nose into Jenna's cheek. The girl cried out, then smiled. Wow, you're so cute. Can I pet you? Max licked her cheek. Charles smiled as he watched Jenna pet the dog and even seemed to smile. Molly and David also looked at Jenna in surprise. Max looked at his master here, guarded the dog, obediently turned away from Charles, and strained his ears. Charles, in his usual manner, disappeared. Even David turned around. Where had he gone? Jenna suddenly turned to Molly. Is that him? Yes. It's crazy. How did you find him? Molly shrugged her shoulders. He found me again. 40 minutes passed, and they heard the sound of a car or a motorcycle. A few minutes later, a large ATV pulled up in front of them. Charles was driving it. He shut off his gear and told Molly to put on whatever soft stuff he had. It took another 20 minutes to get Jenna, who, by the way, stopped resisting. Charles tied her to himself with one of the covers. I went quietly. We followed on foot. David picked up the bags, and they walked down the path. They made it to Grandpa Noah without any trouble. Max was the first to leap out into the clearing and barked at the neighborhood. Grandfather Noah came out of the house. I was expecting you earlier. Molly bowed her head apologetically. I'm sorry, it's my fault. I didn't think I wouldn't pass in the car. Okay, show me your friend. He walked over to Jenna, looked her in the eye for a long time. Then he said, Charles, take her home. It's not that bad. Maybe we can do it in 3 weeks. Jenna looked at her father, frightened. Are you going to leave me here? Yes, Jenna needed it that way. She didn't say anything else, just turned away. They brought the bags in. Molly said, Jenna, I'm going to take my dad into town and come back. I won't be far from here in that village we passed. Jenna didn't say anything back, but Charles gave Molly a quick glance and then turned away. Molly returned the next day. Noah's grandfather's condition was that Jenna not even have a phone, and Molly was terribly worried about her friend. Wendy and Mason reassured her, Stop it. Grandpa Noah will never hurt her or starve her to death. Everything will be all right. In the evening, Molly went for a walk. She walked to the little lake that was just outside the village and froze, looking at the sunset. It was beautiful, really. She shuddered and turned around behind her and grinned. Charles, what is your fashion for sneaking around? You too. Hello. Molly laughed involuntarily. So, how would you like to go around the lake on a boat? Very frankly, Molly did not care where or on what, even on a broomstick. The main thing was to have those strange green eyes and the man by her side. They sailed in silence for a long time. Then Charles spoke. I don't know how to explain to you what is happening to me. I have lived far away from people for a long time. Once people didn't help my parents, and they died. After you told me off, I wondered if I wasn't doing everything right. Molly looked at him and realized that his grief was enormous. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been sick for so many years. Molly wanted so badly to say something to cheer him up. But that's not what she said. My dad was all I had. He always held me in his arms. I was the most important thing in his life. Then my husband killed him, and he wanted to send me to the afterlife too. You saved me, and I got justice. But what kind of justice is that when you can't bring a man back? And this one will be out in 12 years. Are you afraid of him? Molly shrugged her shoulders. Yes and no. They were silent for a while. Then Molly decided to change the subject. She asked where Max was. What do you mean, without him? Max stayed with your Jenna. There was a kind of mutual love between them. I saw the way he looked at me, so I let him stay. You're very kind. That's silly. It's not about me. Charles was embarrassed, and Molly saw it. And where is your house located? Well, if it's across the lake, it's not far. If it's 7 kilometers on foot, maybe more. Oh, wow. I would so like to see your fortress. He looked at her carefully. How do you know it is a fortress? Molly shrugged. I think so, for some reason. Charles grinned at the young woman as if she were his extension. Here he was literally feeling everything she was feeling. And now he understood what she wanted. He steeply turned the boat around and steered it toward the opposite shore. Molly smiled and stared at the plane dragonflies that were escorting them. Wow, Charles smiled contentedly. You like that? You're laughing. This is it. It really is like a castle. I never thought it could even be in the woods. Why hasn't anyone found you yet? He smiled slyly. My house is very hard to get to. An artificial storm made a circle of driftwood within a kilometer radius. Molly sighed. You have to dislike people so much. Charles asked, will you stay? Molly immediately heard the fact that he switched to. You turned to him, looking straight into his eyes. Yes. She didn't know there were people you couldn't get enough of. She couldn't let Charles away from her for a minute. She woke up in the morning and he was gone. Molly was so frightened, so upset, she almost cried. But the door opened and he appeared on the doorstep. It was only now that Molly realized how handsome he was. He was not the fake handsome man her husband had been. Charles had harsh, heavy features, but altogether he painted a man of manly protection. Molly felt like a 5th grader next to him. Breakfast lady. Wendy gave her a sly look. When Molly occasionally showed up at her place. Have you been charmed by our fairy? What woodsman? I don't know what kind. You were afraid of the woods, weren't you? And now you go into the woods. And you're gone for days. Oh, Granny Wendy. You've charmed me. You've charmed me. I don't know what to do. I'll be leaving soon. And how to live when I'm there and he's here. So will you take him? I can't take him. He's not a thing. 3 weeks later, Molly and Charles were on their way to Grandpa No's. Molly was sad. Charles looked closely at her. Molly. What happened? She shook her head and wiped away her tears. Charles stopped, pulling her to him. Well, tell me what's wrong. Charles, I can't not go. But I can't go without you either. What am I going to do? He laughed. Silly girl. Did you really think I would let you go to a place where you are in danger at every turn? She pulled away from him. You agree to come with me? No, I agree to go by myself. After all, I have an apartment. I'll have a job. But when we are married, I will sometimes agree to go with you. Molly wanted to scream. She wanted to jump on Charles's neck, but she didn't have time. I wonder if they'll take me as a witness. Molly slowly turned around not far from them. Leaning on her wand was Jenna. Jenna. Molly rushed over to her friend, hugging her. Molly, not so much. I'm still just learning." 3 months later, Molly had her wedding. Charles threw such a feast that Molly doubtfully asked, "Listen, are you by any chance a hidden millionaire?" To which immediately intervened her witness, who was leaning on a light, beautiful cane. "No, well, my friend does not get any smarter. Don't you like millionaires?" They all laughed, and Molly, out of the corner of her eye, noticed the witness of some very old friend of Charles that he had tracked down recently looking at Jenna. "Wow, looks like there's more romance coming." Charles noticed everything too. He hugged Molly and told us to go outside for a breather. "No need to see us off, we won't be long."